ረጅላማን you are live እያለኝ ነው። ሰላም ሰላም የተከበራችሁና የተወደዳችሁ የዳንሽሬት ቤተሰቦች እንዴት አላችሁ? ሰላም ጤና ፍቅር እናንተ ጋር ትሁን እያልኩ ከች ብያለሁ። ሲደብረኝ ዘው እየገባሁ እንዴ ሞታል እንዴ ታዲያ። ስለዚህ እስቲ ትንሽ እናውራና ከዛ እንሄዳለን። አንድ ሰዓት ብቻ ነው የምቆየው፣ ብዙ አልቆይም። ቅርብ ያላችሁ ገባ በሉና ቤቴን ሞቅ ደመቅ አድርጉት። እኔም በተራይ እንደዛ ሞቃለሁ ማለት እናንተ ሁለት ሰው ይታየኛል የኔ ምርጦች። ጎራ በሉ እንግዲህ ጎራ በሉ ግቡ። መቀመጫውን አሰናድቻለሁ። ቡና ተፈልቷል፣ ስኒው ተደርድሯል፣ ጀበናው ተቀምጧል። ሁሉም ነገር ሬዲ ነው። ፕሊዝ ካሚን ላይክ አንድ ላይክ ቆጥረናል። ሰላም ብሏል። ማን ጫሊ ናት? ጫሊ ለሽሬ ዌልካም ና ጀት አቦነ ደበራና ድርግም ጀዴሴን ይታ ጫሉ ኮነ ደበራና ድርግም ጀዴሴን ማንን ጎደሬ haga sa'aatii 6 turuun koo giddiidha. Waa dhaggeeffachuufan eegaa jira. Namni waan namni dhiyeessu. Kanaaf maalan godhee rafuun barbaanne. Kanaafan seene sa'aatuma takkittiidhaaf jedhee caalii koo akkam nagaadha. Wayni maqaan kun hime bakka. Gaaddiseedha miti gaaddisee. Gaaddu jaalalaan nulaaltu jirti laayikiidhaan. Baga nagaan dhufte gaadduu koo. Ammumachaan jira sanuu. Ammumachaan jira irriiba koo akkanarraa namni akka ari'uu barbaada. Hin dhaga'amaa laata sagaleen koo? Dhugaa irriibni koo dhufeera. Naa ammummachiisa. Ijji koo hin boochii. Dhiisi bakka maalan siin jedha. Naani laayivii akka rafne har'a. Laayivii akka rafne sodaadha. Abbeen biran jira akkuma na seenan dhufee baga nagaan nu eegdee koodee na jettee jirti. Ishii bareeddu koo. Duratti mana gannii jechuudha. Gannii nuu jiraatte ittimi. Mana ganniitti koomantii koo jala maatii naaf ta'aa jettee mucayyoo wayii barreessitee jirti. Warqii kan jedhamtu. Kanaaf koomantii akkasii hin barreessinaa. Ganniidhaan balleessii koomantii san jedhiin maaliif maatii naa ta'ii mana yoo jedhu feekii ta'uusaa hin barru waan ta'eef gaarii miti caalii. Yoo na dhageesse jechuudha. Gannitti himiiti koomantii maatii mana jedhu san haa balleessitu. Mucayyoo warqii jedhamtu achi jalatti barreessitee jirti. Ani maatii godhee jira mucatti garuu koomantii sanii haa balleessitu ganni. Bakka abbeetti deebi'a. Ani guyyaa irra oolee jira akkanumaan na dabbarraan sa'aatii takkaaf jedhee seene. Yoo namni dhufe nan haasa'a, yoo namni dhufuu baates nan haasa'a. Kanaaf abbee bira deebi'ee ho'isi mana ho'isi. Maqaa gooftaa. Maal ammoo madheetu dee'e. Tuni waanatti deddeebi'ee akka dikkisiin ishee mi'aayu dhidi. ይሄ በጣም አጭሩ ደቂቃ ነው የሚሆነው እርግጠኛ ነኝ። ለማንኛውም ቀን ስለምን ነበረ የጀመርኩት? ምንድነው Okay. Okay. I think it's very important to say something about use of instructional media. We know that using instructional media is very important to enhance the students' learning, but it is so vital to know the assumption behind the relevance of using instructional media. Despite of its advantage, individuals who are applying and also who are using instructional media for their learning need to know the assumption behind the use of instructional media. So to begin with these points, one of the assumption is that learning occurs best when a multiplicity of senses are involved. A multiplicity of senses are involved. That means it is more effective for the individuals if he or she is engaged in practice in addition to or the hearing or seeing or visual sense organ. So increasing the sense organ engagement of the individual will support the learning of that person to be very effective. And the other assumption is over reliance on verbal communication is ineffective. This means I read on a book that individuals' attention decreases within 10 minutes toward this lecture or verbal communication. So that, which means after 10 minutes of lecture or after 10 minutes of verbal communication, uh, the instructional process is not effective if we are continuing using the same instructional method, that means conversation or lecture. So that whenever we teach our students, it is very important to bear in mind that the first 10 minutes are very effective minutes in lecture session. In lecture session, then after 10 minutes, it is recommendable that teachers or instructors use other active learning methods in order to initiate, in order to motivate the students' interest towards their learning. So this These principles, these assumptions lead us to use instructional materials in the process of teaching and learning. Particularly, Dali's cone of experience indicates that whenever one, oh my gosh, stop, I'm sorry. So whenever one uses instructional materials, instructional process will be more effective compared to the opposite. And in Dani's cone of experience, the student is can be stimulated more if they engage their hearing and sight sense organ, and also it will be very effective if they add engagement or practice practical activities. Learning moved from verbal symbols to direct, purposeful, contextual, or practical, or visible experiences or activities. That means it is important, of course, to start teaching through verbal communication, but this verbal communication should not be stagnant at that point. Rather, it has to be developed into contextual or practical experiences. So this indicates that a lecture or conversation by itself is not something negative, something disadvantageous, but the way we are using, the extent we are applying lecture method in instructional process matters. It is effectiveness. It is effectiveness. And the other point to be touched here is instructional media. Uh, of course, we know that these materials are different in their varieties. So anything or a range of materials used to support the student's learning by the teacher can be considered as instructional materials. Not only that one, uh, the the materials which extend the student's understanding to any material, maybe real objects, maybe models, maybe mock-ups, particularly models which are representing real materials, but which are not, of course, real materials. Mock-ups, which seems the real material in its function, but it is short-term functioning material, and also specimen, particularly which is removed from its natural setting and which cannot be taken back to its original context. So such kind of materials can be considered as instructional materials. These materials are auxiliary materials in the teaching and learning process to increase the students' engagement and also to concretize the learning of the students from abstract to concrete. But there are mainly two categories of instructional materials. These may be electronic and also printed materials. Both are very important. Both are very important. However, there is criticism toward this electronic media because advocates of printed materials criticize this electronic media. This is because they say it deteriorates the internal or mental information processing ability of students, as electronics provide individuals, students, ready-made information which doesn't need the process doesn't meet the engagement of the students to get the information. So as the students are proceeding in the same way, the ability of the student to think, to internalize, to explore and discover knowledge decreases. As a result, they criticize electronic media as compared to that of printed media. And such advocates of printed media advise students to spend their time in library and also in reading different reference materials like books, journals, and different literature based materials, so that they can use their mind, and also they can explore really what they are expecting in the process of their learning. So personally, I support this the advocates of printed materials. These days, the students do not like to use printed materials to read books which are referred by their instructors. Rather, they like to Google, they like to use very short and key notes like PowerPoints and other materials which are very compartment and which is very fragmented. However, I personally recommend to students and to anybody who want to get detailed understanding of the issue at hand to focus on reading materials, maybe downloaded materials or maybe online, but they have to read. Particularly, they have to use libraries or materials which are stored in libraries. So this is what is very important about instructional materials. When I come to the advantage of instructional materials, in addition to what I have mentioned previously, it helps the students to retain more but to forget less. So this is in other way. It means that instructional materials concretize information, knowledge, theory, and it limits the theoretical, the just the concept of the issue at hand. So it increases retention, it increases the memory of the students about the material they have learned about, and also it helps us to cover greater lesson portion with effectiveness, and the other is to assure permanency of learning for relatively longer time. In this case, I want to remind you that learning is a process of a relatively permanent behavioral change on the part of the learners. When we say this, learning has to be relatively permanent in order to make this in order to make this permanency. It is very important to support the students through different materials, through different techniques, so that one of the technique that helps the students for permanency of their learning is using instructional materials. And also instructional materials make solutions of problems very easier. For example, let me mention one example. In a right angle triangle, where the adjacent is 3 meter and the the one of the side is 4 meter. If we ask students to calculate the other side, the longest side of the triangle, you know, this theoretically described workout is very difficult to for the students to understand it. But if we draw a triangle and if we indicate the given values for the two sides, and if we indicate which side the student is to find the solution or the length, then this will be very easy. So that instructional materials help individual students to understand concepts easier than having problem with it. So this is what I have to say for the time being. But next time when I come streaming, when I start streaming, I will continue with such kind of explanation for students who are interested to have more understanding in such areas, particularly in teacher education and curriculum studies. So I can say thank you for watching, and this is the last point that I have to indicate. Thank you so much. I appreciate those of you who follow me, who attend, who support Dance Radio. Please, if you are new, subscribe, like, share, and comment if there is anything that we have to improve. We can take your comments. So jot down the comments on the space provided for comment. Thank you so much.